creativity of the type that I'm talking about requires teamwork, and it requires an environment in which it's okay to do what the other people would call screw up or make a mistake or try ideas that don't work, because a creative environment makes knowledge or things that have never existed before in this world. And if you're working in a creative environment, the typical solution to the dysfunctions of the team, to specify tasks and gig and gamify incentives, is not going to result in the creativity that will make the team successful, because it's not teamwork.
That makes sense.
Other experiences?
My question of what's the point if, where my mind immediately went was, we have analytics for everything, and being able to measure the success of any endeavor in very narrow terms encourages, even absent a formal structure with pay incentives and et cetera, it encourages taking what works and milking it far beyond the point of diminishing returns until you destroy its ability to even give what returns it was, while not innovating beyond that. You see the line graph and you see the spike and go, oh, that worked. We're doing that all the time, 7 days a week from now on. Oh, but it's not spiking like it was. Well, yeah, because it didn't spike because it was the thing it was. It spiked because it was new, and you're not doing anything new anymore.
That's a great point. You get a little bit of feedback, and you're like, this is great. Now that I have this feedback and it's rewarding, I know exactly what to do. I will specify the task, I will align the incentives, and I will just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. But the competition changes, the technology changes, the audience changes, the environment in which you're working changes. And the same thing over and over and over again is no longer the thing that you're going to be rewarded for. And when you haven't experimented along the way, when you haven't had the courage to screw up and reinvent and just keep going, the old thing gets past the point of diminishing returns and will no longer support the commitments that you've made to these employees or these other people in the teams who have high fixed costs. And you're like, stop doing exactly the same thing in an optimized way that's aligned with your task and your incentive, and now start experimenting again. People are incapable of whipsawing their culture just because your line graph turned over on your analytics. You must constantly explore and exploit the knowledge that you're creating at the same time. So it is somewhat schizophrenic. You can't toggle a person from one to the other just because you say, well, now is the time to reinvent. People have to be in both places in the startup community at the same time, responsive to feedback and always thinking about what's the next thing that they're not sure of, what's the next worthy experiment.
It definitely gets challenging when it comes to asking questions, and that's something I'm having a problem with right now.
Let's talk about the challenge of asking questions. What's challenging about asking questions?
Well, that's when you go into bothering. And I also, I want to be independent as well, but being new in a firm, I definitely have a lot of questions, and I want to ask a lot of questions, and I want to be direct. And that's why I want to ask questions, but then I get in the complicated, I don't want to bother people.
I had a subordinate who suffered from not asking questions because he didn't want to bother. But what was really going on was he wanted to figure it out himself. Why would the subordinate want to figure it out himself?
I have that problem as well.
Yeah, you do. This subordinate was afraid that they wouldn't get credit if they didn't do it on their own. The gig and gamification, this rewards individual achievement. And he was afraid that if he didn't figure it out himself, then the reward wouldn't be forthcoming. That someone would withhold the reward because they say, well, actually, you didn't do that work, or you're not worthy of that reward because you learned it from somewhere. He thought, and the academic environment teaches you this, even if the answer to whatever the problem is has been worked out by decades of students before you, is the exact same calculus problem that Isaac Newton solved 300 years ago. We expect our students to figure it out themselves or withhold the reward. He was coming from the university environment into a business environment, and he still had this habit of being expected to figure it out himself. I would have much rather he asked a question, and use the knowledge that someone else had to be more productive. But it was fear of looking dumb that meant he didn't. And there are dumb questions. Sometimes we look dumb. We have to be okay looking dumb because we learn faster that way.
I sort of have this internal conflict between, or maybe not internal, there seems to be a conflict for me between keeping the boss informed and just keep going. That I'm struggling to reconcile. Like, at what point do you stop going and like do you keep, there's got to be some sort of feedback loop in there, and I'm not sure where it comes in.
You see a conflict between keeping the boss informed and just keep going. Keeping the boss informed is not the same thing as waiting for the boss to decide.
Okay.
Unless otherwise ordered is a fantastic protocol for just keep going. You keep the boss informed. I'm going here. I'm going to do this. I'm making this decision. I'm expending this resource. I'm committing these resources. The boss, you're not putting the burden of initiative on the boss to stop you or redirect you. There are some where you'll be like, these are the 3 alternatives and this is the one I recommend. And it stays on hold until the boss gets back to you. And that's okay because you have other things to go. But if it stays on hold to the point where it becomes urgent, you have to say, unless otherwise ordered, I'm going with my recommendation. There's a difference between information and decision. And I think that's where your conflict lies. Keeping people informed does not mean you're sitting around waiting for people. It means you're telling people what you're deciding. Does that make sense?
I think that does make sense.
Okay.